Lucy, I can see you're walking through. If you're going to just be with us or do whatever, however it works out. And I think all the storytellers went over to the seaside. I think that's what they've done. So I'm going to start with the story, and then I'm going to go to Lucy, and then I'm going to go to Helen. Are you going to join in tonight? Are you looking to do something? Right. Okay. So the batting order. Right. I'll get it sorted out, and I'll see who comes. So it's going to be me. I'll start with Lucy. You go second. Keith, you go 3. Helen, you go 4. And we'll take it from there. Then Lucy from the festival, if you want to come in and do something. Do you want to come in and say something about the festival now, or wait till fortnight, or you seem to be walking through the Medina still?
No, I'm actually in a very nice metal and jewelry shop at the moment.
Are you shopping? Are you shopping? Is that what you're doing?
I am absolutely not shopping. No. Well, actually, I am shopping, but I'm shopping for something for the storytellers, not for me. So I'm feeling very self-righteous about that. Definitely not shopping for me.
So you're shopping for headache tablets, are you?
There's some nice things. Yeah. No, but there's some plaques that have got pictures of a chef, a clown, judo server, optician, and storyteller somewhere. I'm not sure where the storyteller is.
Oh, I've seen those.
Yeah. Oh, and look, Mike, here's one for you. A muscle man. this one because Dot is a nurse.
Lucy.
Anyway,
Lucy,
they're getting a little bit risque, so I better stop there.
No, Lucy, how do you know I wear red underpants?
Well, you'll have to ask your organizer for that. I don't know. Don't all men wear red underpants?
I'm going to have to talk to Mr. Wood about this, I think.
It's a good colour. It's a Moroccan colour anyway, so.
It certainly is. Right, so I'm going to get started. Right, so I'm going to go first. So if everybody who's not doing anything can mute, and here we go. A long time ago, about the year 450, on the side of the River Severn, as it comes down from Shrewsbury and it goes down to the Iron Bridge, there was a moot. Now, the moot was between the Mercians, who were just getting started up by a king called Penda, and the other side. Now, the other side were the kingdoms of Kent and the kingdoms of Northumberland. And they come down to have a moot, which was the old English name for river crossing, a meeting by a river crossing. And they were talking about trade and how they could sell horses and all the other things across England, because mainly everybody lived by the seaside. That's where all the boats were. And to go around the coast by the seaside on the sea was a lot easier than it was going across land. So we're pretty far up here, and we're 80 miles from the sea. And so you could get up the River Severn and down again, but it took a long time. So we're having a moot about trade. And St. Augustine, but he wasn't a saint in them days. He was just called St. Augustine. He'd come over, and he'd come up because this side of the river, to the west of the river, the people were still pagans. The Romans had gone, and the Saxons that had come from that part of Scandinavia and Denmark and Finland and Germany, and they were still pagans. But on the other side, Augustine had come over from Rome, and he was happily converting all the people. And here was his chance. Here was his chance to talk to the Mercians and come and start creating a Christian community here. So just as all the work had been finished about that, they're having a security conference in Munich at the moment. It was the same thing, but just on a smaller basis. So he came in and he said, listen, he said, I want to talk to you about Christianity. I want to talk to you about our Lord and Jesus and what's in this book, because he had a Bible with him. And he started preaching and everything else. And the Mercians, they were all sat there and they folded their arms and they listened to him ever so politely. And they said, that's fine. Can we go now? And Augustine said, no, you can't go now. He said, Yeah, absolutely not. You're not going to go now. You have to stay here and you have to listen to me. Well, the Mercians, they had their own religious people, and they were called a shaman or a druid or whoever they was, and they came walking over and he sat down and he was talking to St. Gascoigne and the fellows on the eastern side of the river, and he explained all about his religion and how it worked for them. And in the end, he said these words: "You'll always remember my religion more than you're going to remember the Christians." And St. Augustine got cross and he picked up his axe. So he just borrowed an axe he got from somewhere and he threw it across the river. As it landed in the river, there was a divot. And he had the gumption or the courage or whatever in his abbey smock, in his monk smock, to wade the river. And he picked up his axe and he dropped an acorn into the divot that the axe had made. And he said, as long as that oak tree grows there, I know there'll be Christians west of the river. And I don't care, because I think what you say won't last as long as an oak tree, its son and its grandson. And he turned around and walked away again. Well, the shaman or the druid, whoever the religious person, answered by saying this: "We'll always be here longer than all the Christians, and I'll tell you why. For the day is today is the Sunday, and tomorrow is the moon's day. And the day after that is Tua's day. And Tua is not the god of death, but it is the god of endings. It's the god of finishings. But every finishing, there's always a beginning. Every door that closes, there's another one that opens. Then there's Woden's day. Then there's Thor's day. And then there's Freya's day. And then there's Saturn's day. And as long as we call the names of the week by those names, I'll know that my gods are always in the current, in the community." And there these two religious men stared at each other all these years ago. Well, as we all know this, that oak tree planted is still there to this day. Well, its grandson's still there to this day. And the village that story comes from is called Cressidge, and it's called Christ's Oak, was the name of the old name for it. And nowadays it's a nice little village with a nice little club with nice little people. Down by the river, there's a bridge there nowadays. And we also know that the days of the week are the ones that we still use. So both of them are right. But there's been a lot of history since then about wars and things and everything else. But nowadays, if you go to Cressidge, it's full of nice people and there's a church there. But we always call the days of the week by the old names. So we always remember that religion as well. Whoever worships those old gods in our country, you're welcome to, because we have a thing called faith, and you're allowed to worship any god you like as long as it's not against the law. So there you go. All these years later, in the 21st century, and Cressidge, I was in there. And well, I might pop down after I finish this and go and have a pint in there, because I told the story today. And it's called Cressidge, and it's on the road from Shrewsbury to Muchwell. There you go. There's a nice little story for you. Right. So I saw a couple of people popping up. I can see Amy Douglas, and she was just walking around looking really happy. And Despina, and that's a picture of you and your youngster, because I got that one 2 weeks ago. Right, Lucy, we go to you, and then Lucy will go to Keith. Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Right, I was going to go Lucy. I was going to go Lucy Taylor. Lucy Wood, not Lucy.
Okay, yes.
Sorry. Yeah, I've got two Lucys tonight. Go on then, Lucy. Lucy Taylor then from London.
The blocks. I was riding my bike in a park when it happened. A huge gold block came from outer space and hovered above us. The gold block was silent, mysterious. And what was inside? We didn't know. Angels demons, aliens. The government decided not to attack because we didn't know what we were dealing with. Time passed by, and the gold block was still hovering above us. But after 6 months, we finally realized what the gold block was. Silent and mysterious was the gold block. And then suddenly, it exploded into millions of mini gold blocks that fell on our planet. They were everywhere, in the streets, destroying buildings and houses, in the lakes, in the seas, and they were growing and growing. We then realized that this was an alien invasion to steal the spaces of our planet. The government decided now to attack and asked the army to use the most powerful weapons. But the gold blocks were impenetrable. Their only claim to life was that they could move and grow. Then, to our dismay, we saw a huge bronze block come from outer space and hover above us. We didn't have to wait long. When the bronze block exploded into millions of mini bronze blocks, which fell on top of the gold blocks. And they were growing and growing. We realized that this was an alien invasion that had two parts. The first one was to steal the spaces of our planet, and the second, that the bronze hated the gold blocks because gold is a precious metal, pure, and bronze is a mixture of copper and tin and considered an alloy. So what could the bronze blocks do to punish the gold blocks? Cover them so that people will only see the bronze blocks. The situation was so bizarre that we even dedicated a little tune to it. An alien block of everything else, but the enemy wanted to do the same. So now you have two alien blocks, two opposite beings, fighting till the end. It was an ordinary man in our planet that came up with the idea. Do to those gold and bronze blocks what we do to our own bronze and gold. We melt them with extreme levels of heat to generate jewelry and other works of art. If we melt them, maybe they will die and will stop growing. So the government asked the army to attack the gold and bronze blocks with extreme levels of heat. And they melted into liquid metal. And they stopped growing as if they were dead. And yes, they were dead. But now we had a planet that was paved with gold and bronze blocks everywhere. And even though gold and bronze were dead, they were still worth a fortune. People will come from all over the galaxy to buy pieces of our gold and bronze. We then were baffled that something that began with an alien invasion for our space and a war between gold and bronze ended in our good fortune. Thank you.
Right. Lucy, I love your imagination and your creativity and all the rest of it. It's just lovely. And thank you. And I'll see you in 2 weeks' time, hopefully, with another story of aliens and things from invaders and people from away from our planet. Absolutely lovely. Despina, I can see you. Hello. Where are you, in Marrakesh still, or are you back home? You're back home?
Yeah, I'm back on my little island, Syros, in Greece, yes. But I have left it a little bit of my heart back there.
Have you? Have you had a good time?
Of course.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's impossible not to have a good time, I think.
Good, absolutely. I can see Amy. I think you're walking somewhere, Amy, or you're in the middle, Sam. You're waving. Okay, right. So
we're on the bus. We can all shout to you from the bus back from Essaouira, if you like.
Go on then. Go on, say hello.
Right. Okay, we're on the we're live on the World Storytelling Round. If anybody wants to say hello to Mike Rust. Hello. We've got time to switch the radio on then. Driver, radio off, please. Radio off.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much.
We've got.
I hope you're having a good time, Amy.
We've got John Ray. We've got Mike Words and Lucille. We've got Mossy and Megan and Kamal. We've got Kamal. We've got Anna. We've got Omar. Right. Who's in the corner? We have a bus full of storytellers, all travelling back from a day at the seaside and telling stories by the sea.
Brilliant.
Amy, will you please tell John Rowe that the blind people of Syros heard his poem Easy in Greek today, and they thank him for it.
All right.
You hear that, John?
Well done. Oh.
You told him yourself.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi. Right, so how did it go down? Did they like it?
Yes, very much. Only it got really excited. In the end, she said, that's right. That's exactly right. And she came and shook my hand afterwards. I said, it's not my poem, but she liked it anyway.
Oh, well, thank you. I feel honored.
Right.
They did too. They felt the same.
Right.
Sorry
Amy,
for the invasion, Mike.
Yeah. No, that's okay. Amy, if you've got Mike Wood there, you tell him his Lucy's in the shop shopping. Okay.
Oh, cheers.
Right. If everybody mutes, that's you, Amy. And we're going to go to Keith.
Okay. Fox had been out hunting. And he'd come back with a hare, and he had a big dinner, and he was very satisfied, but he was very thirsty. He didn't have any water, he didn't have anything to drink. And so he walked and walked and walked to a local stream, a brook, but it was dry. There was no water in the brook. And he walked and walked and walked again to try and find another brook, another stream. But again, he found one, but it was dry. And he thought to himself, I know, in the local farmer's property, in his yard, there's a well. Now, I've got to be careful because the farmer doesn't like me, because I often, if I can, I'll go into the farmyard and I'll try to break through into the hen house and through the hen pen, and I'll grab a chicken or I'll kill one or two and wander off with that. And so he might shoot me. So I'll have to be very, very careful. And so he crept into the farmyard, looking this way and that way. And he came across to the well. Now, in those days, there was no running water in people's houses and in their farmer's cottage. The farmer had to draw water from the well. But it's in the daytime, it's very, very hot. It's June time. The fox was so thirsty and so hot. And he went over to the well, and the well had a windlass. And so they had a long rope, and at one end there was a bucket. And at the other end was also a bucket. And one bucket was down near the water, and one bucket was up at the top of the well. And the fox looked into the top bucket. I thought, I wonder if there's a drop of water in there, but no, it was bone dry. And I thought, well, how can I get some water out of the well? Because he couldn't wind the handle like the farmer could, not with his paws. I thought, well, if I jump into this bucket, I'll go down and then the other bucket will come up. It's on that kind of pivot. I thought, yes, I'll do that. And it jumped into the bucket, it went down into the well. And it nestled on top of the water, and there he was. He's able to have a lovely drink. It's lovely and cool down there. And he was drinking. Oh, this is wonderful. He's having a wonderful time and lots to drink. But then he thought, how can I get out of here? Because it's a long way up there. It's 10, 12 feet. How can I get out? What can I do? But who should come along was a goat. And the goat also was very thirsty, and he went to the bucket that was into the windlass at the top of the well, and he looked in there, and there was no water. What can I do? And he looked down into the well then, he could see all the water, cool water, and saw, hello, Mr. Fox. And Mr. Fox looked, hello, Mr. Goat. And the goat said, I'm very thirsty. I'd like some of that water down there. And the fox said, well, you can come and join us. If you get into that bucket on the other end of the rope, then you could come down and join me, and we can have a natter, and we can exchange stories, and we can have a chat, and you could also have a drink. And the goat, he jumped into the bucket, zoom, he went down, but also, because it's on the end of the spindle, into the rope, the fox then was carried right up to the top of the well, was able to get out. Well, the goat was so pleased. There he's sitting in his bucket, and he's able to drink lots and lots of water. It's nice and cool. And then he looked up and said, Mr. Fox, can you get me out of here? Because I can't get out. And the fox looked down and said, Mr. Goat, the best thing you can do is wait for another silly old goat to come and get in the other bucket, and so you can get out again. And the fox, he wandered off. He didn't care. But I'd like to add a little bit to that story, in that I think, well, the farmer, he would come eventually to have some water. And he'd look down and he'd see his pet goat at the bottom there, and he'd wind the handle and bring out the goat, as well as getting some water for himself. And so that's the story of the fox and the goat, as told by me on this evening.
Thanks, Keith. That's lovely. Right. So, Helen, right. And so you see how it works.
Yep.
Yeah.
I shall tell my. Sorry, go on.
It says Helen Wright, UK Reading.
Yeah, Reading.
Oh, UK Reading. Sorry. Okay.
It's very confusing living in Reading. When you're ever trying to find anything like the library, you put Reading Library, and it brings you reading. What?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's quite a difficult town to live in.
Right. Okay. Right.
This is a story about fairies, who, as you know, there's lots of different names for fairies all around the world and all around the country. And often they're just called little people. To be honest, they don't really mind what you call them, as long as you treat them with respect. Now, the girl in this story always treated the little people with respect. She always made sure to leave a little something out for them each night, and to say thank you if they did any little tasks for her. She was the oldest of 5 children, and she'd always helped her mother with the younger children as well as with the housework. But the younger ones were getting old enough to look after themselves, more or less. And it was time for the girl to go out and make a living and contribute to the family. There weren't many jobs around in the little valley where they lived, so very early one morning, she set out to walk into the next valley in search of work. She eventually found herself at a farmer's cottage and knocked on the door, asking for work. The farmer's wife who answered the door was delighted. "You've come just in time. I'm just off to the fair and I've got all this spinning, all this flax that I need to be spun. If you can spin all of this flax for me before I get back tonight, I will pay you. But if not, I will pay you nothing." And the girl looked. The table in the kitchen was full of flax. There's no way she could do it all. But what choice did she have? Her family needed the money. So she agreed. The farmer's wife quickly set off on her cart to the fair. So the girl started work. She got the spindle set up and the spinning wheel, set up, and she began to pull the flax through and pull, and she worked with her foot on the treadle and pulled and span, and she was doing well. But after several hours, there was still a table full of flax, and her fingers were sore, and her foot ached, and her lips were raw from wetting her fingers. She didn't know what to do. But she remembered when she'd come in through the garden, there was a hawthorn tree in the garden. And she'd heard many stories about hawthorn trees and how sometimes fairies and spirits lived in them. So she thought it was worth a try. So she went, stood under the tree and looked up through the dark leaves and called out, "Please help me. Please help me. I need to spin all of this flax into thread." There was no answer. She sat down under the tree and waited. Then she heard a rustling in the leaves, a swaying, a wind. She stood up, and then a strange little man jumped down in front of her. "Don't be afraid," he said. "We have heard your call and we have come to help. What you must do is go back into the cottage, open the door, call out, 'Welcome, welcome,' and then leave. You must leave for the rest of the day. Do not come back until it is getting dark. And then when you come back, open the door and call out, 'Thank you.'" So the girl did this. She went back to the cottage, opened the door, called out, "Welcome," and left. Now, she'd had a long walk into this valley, but she was young and fit, and so she walked and walked up the hill, sort of admired the scenery, listened to the birds, enjoyed the sunshine. And as it was getting dark, she returned back. As she got to the cottage, she could see that the windows of the cottage were grey and smeary, and she couldn't see through them. But she did what she was told, knocked on the door, opened it and called out, "Thank you, thank you." And as she looked in, there were dozens of tiny people with tiny spinning wheels. And they rustled away, bundled up all their stuff and ran out of the door. And as she looked, the whole table was now covered with yarn that had been spun. It had all gone, all of the flax. Just then, the farmer's wife arrived back and came marching into the cottage, very pleased with herself. She had a few drinks at the fair, and she was expecting not to have to pay this silly girl for the work she'd done, because she couldn't possibly have finished all the spinning. So when she walked in and saw all of the flax had been spun, she went to examine it. It was very, very fine, not the thick, coarse linen she was expecting, but like a horse's hair and silver and glistening. "You did not make this yourself. You have invited fairies into my house. How dare you?" But they have helped. They've done no harm. No harm? Then what is that evil grey stuff on my windows? Get rid of it! And the girl began to pull at the grey stuff at the windows, which was like cobwebs. And she pulled and pulled. But as it came off in her hands, it turned into the most amazing, beautiful fabric she had ever seen. It was woven from thousands and thousands of blue flowers, bluebells and forget-me-nots, cornflowers. She wrapped it round her shoulders and it fell in beautiful rustling folds. "Give that to me!" The woman grabbed at it. But as the farmer's wife grabbed the cloth, it turned back into grey cobwebs. And try as she might, she could not wrap it round her shoulders. It just slid off and pooled on the floor in a grey heap. "Oh, take this stuff out of my house and go! I'm not paying you a penny." The girl bundled up the cloak, wrapped it round her shoulders, where it again turned into a beautiful cloak, and left. And the girl spent a long and happy life because she always valued that gift from the fairies.
Oh, thank you very much. That's lovely, Helen. And we do this once a fortnight. Now, it's normally 7 o'clock. Because they've all been in Marrakesh, we haven't got the timings quite right tonight. But it's 7 o'clock Greenwich Mean Time, which is now, and it goes on. And I do it every Sunday, every other Sunday.
Yep.
So you just miss one, and then we're back here, and you're very welcome to come. Hello, I can see a little. Oh. I've seen photographs of you, but I've never seen you. So, hello. What's your name? Sorry, Helen, I was talking to you. I do.
That's all right.
Anyway, please come again.
Okay.
My
Okay,
name
I'll
is
do-
Persa.
Oh, I can't. Right. Thank you, Helen, and I'll see you in a fortnight. Otherwise, I want a sick note. Okay. So I'm going to go to Diana next, from the Highlands of Scotland. And Despina, your picture's gone, but I believe that was your daughter with you, was it? Well, I can't see. Okay, well, we'll go to Diana next. Hey, you're back again. What have you done? Tied her and put her under the bed? Right, we're going to go to the Highlands of Scotland, where the snowdrops will be out and where it's been stormy and snowy, is it today?
It hasn't been that stormy, but all the snowdrops are out, so it's
Yeah,
good.
no, snowdrops are beautiful here. Yeah, okay.
And crocus
Right.
is down. So sorry I'm a bit late, but I looked on the schedule and it said 6. So anyway, here I go.
Yeah.
Right. Saul was coming up for 12 years old, and he stayed in Seattle with his dad. And his dad had a job down by the docks. He was in the office and he dealt with all the manifests and everything like that to do with getting goods shipped out to various places. And it was just the two of them at home. So if his dad was working late or something like that, Saul would quite often in the holidays or in the evenings, maybe weekends, take his skateboard and go on that, or else read a book or something. He would amuse himself while his dad was still busy, and then they would both drive home together. Well, he heard from his dad that there'd been something sighted down by the harbour in Seattle, and it was a white fox. Now, people had seen red foxes round there, mangy-looking ones, but no one had ever seen a white fox, and you wouldn't expect to, because that's not where they come from. So anyway, Saul was determined when he heard this that he would find this fox. And he waited, and there were 3 times he was down there when his dad was working, and each time he tried to suss out where a fox might hide, but he couldn't find any trace. And he was beginning to think that maybe there really wasn't, or maybe even the fox had moved on. But then there was one night, he thought he saw a white blur in the distance, and then again. And he realized, this white fox, an Arctic fox, was smaller than the red foxes, but it could move. And he was totally amazed. So he just stayed put where he was because he didn't want to frighten it away. And he tried to get a little bit nearer, but not too close. And he had his rucksack with him, and inside a peanut butter sandwich. So he threw it ahead of himself. And the fox didn't move right away, but then it was hungry. So it came up, snatched the bread, and went off into the shadows. And Saul was amazed, fascinated. He just couldn't get over this. Well, a little while after that, as it was coming up to his 12th birthday, he got a postcard from his grandparents, which was quite usual. It was usually every week on a Friday that he would receive a postcard from them. And it just so happened on the front of the postcard was this Arctic fox. And Saul was beginning to wonder if there was some sort of connection. Anyway, he read the postcard, and the postcard said, "It'd be great to see you." But the problem was, every time he suggested going to see his grandparents in Alaska, his dad would try and put it off, or else he wouldn't say anything, which was understandable, really, because his wife, Saul's mum, had died when Saul was just 2 years old. And they both came from Alaska, Ben, Saul's father, and his mum. And going back there was just too much. He just couldn't bear it. And also, the maternal grandparents were there for Saul. And Ben felt really bad about the whole thing because it had been his idea to move to Seattle as a family. And it just hadn't worked out. He thought it would be a better standard of living, a better job for him, a better school for Saul. But none of that had worked. When Saul was 2, his mum was knocked down by a car. And there were all these feelings, but he didn't really talk about them. And consequently, because he didn't talk to Saul, Saul didn't really talk to him. And Saul had problems. He was in this school in Seattle and he looked different to all the other kids. He was of the Inuit people. He had dark hair and dark eyes, and he was quite small. So in the break times or at lunch times, he would spend a lot of time trying to avoid some of the bullies that were going about. And he was a loner as well. Anyway, when he saw this fox the next time that he was down by the harbour, he really felt some sort of connection, and he couldn't understand why, but he did, and he seemed to feel happy and better. And this fox was a loner, a bit like he was. Maybe that's why he identified. Time went on, and then one night, his father had a phone message, saying that the white fox had been captured and was in a cage. And when Saul heard this, well, he was really upset, because in that short period of time that he'd got to know this fox, well, got as near as he could to it, and he felt there was some sort of connection. He really wanted everything to be okay. Anyway, the next day, him and his dad went back to the office, and there was a crate in there with this Arctic fox in it. And Saul was really worried, but he'd heard stories about the animal welfare van that came along and took all the wild cats. And his dad said that they went then to good homes. But Saul didn't think that was quite right. He thought something else horrible happened to them. But he didn't say anything. And when he saw the fox there, he just felt how vulnerable the fox might feel. And he walked slowly over, and the fox was at the back of the crate. But as Saul approached, it came a little bit closer. And they were both there together, the fox in the cage and Saul sitting beside him. And then it was all coming out about what would really happen, or would the police even be called, and then a marksman could come and shoot this fox. And Saul just couldn't bear that. And he spoke out, but he didn't really know what was going to happen, what could happen. It's not like this fox could be a pet. But then he started to think about where it might be at home. And he thought about Alaska, and he thought about his grandparents. And when him and his dad were on their own, well, his father felt this animal should go back to a proper place. where it should be, where it's at home. And so it was decided, although it was difficult for him, Ben decided that he would hire a car, take the car, get a crate, and they would take this white fox back, and they would stay with the grandparents, which is what Saul really wanted to do for his birthday, for his 12th birthday. And because it was a long journey, well, they had a chance to talk to each other. And they stayed in cheap motels, and they had to be very careful to take the fox in so as not to be noticed. They had the cage separate and the fox on a lead and covered over, and they had to be one went ahead to make sure that no one could see them. But they managed, and they eventually got to Alaska, to where his grandparents stayed. And it was agreed that, well, the next day maybe they would take it and let it go. Well, his grandparents came out to see the fox. And then they all went in, had something to eat, and everyone was really tired. But the next day they did take the fox out. And when they felt they came to a suitable space in the woods, they opened the cage and it went out. And Saul felt really happy about this. Here was the fox in its rightful place. Anyway, after that, he had time to get to know his grandparents, and he discovered things that he never knew, all about his mum. His dad had never talked about it, probably because it was so much heartache. But he discovered that his mum was a sculptress, and they had lots of outhouses in the back garden, but one of them was where she used to work, and she would carve out of soapstone or serpentine beautiful animals. Saul had actually had a library book from when he was still in Seattle, that it was all about animals and birds from Alaska. And he could see a lot of them represented here. Well, his grandmother said, your mum was very talented, much more than me. I taught her initially, but she made all these things. But the Arctic fox was always the one that sold first. It was as if it was not more important, but it just had more appeal. Anyway, she actually showed him, the grandmother, how to sculpt, and he loved it. And his father came in, and his father noticed what they were doing, and the grandmother said, look, he's learning. He's never too young. You're never too young to learn. And Saul spent a lot of time in that studio while he was staying there, and he really felt much more at home, much more at ease. And even he heard his father laughing with his grandfather, and he hadn't heard his father laughing for an awfully long time. So maybe it was good for his father as well. Anyway, at the end of the week, his father said to him, right, pack up, we're going home the next day. Well, Saul was usually quite obedient, but he just said no, that he wasn't going, that he was staying here, and this was much better for him. And he didn't want to go back to that terrible school where the bullies were. And he didn't really feel he was learning anything there anyway. And it all came out, and it wasn't that of a petulant child just rebelling against a parent. He'd thought this all through, and he felt that it was the right thing. Of course, his father would have to tell the school, if that was the case, that he wasn't going back. And his father was in a bit of a quandary because, well, he had to go back to his job. And how was he going to support his son if, if he wasn't, or look after him properly? He had to be in the same place. But being in the same place would mean getting a new job. It would mean complete change. It would be a big step to take. And maybe he wasn't ready to take it. But because Saul felt so strongly, he left Saul with the grandparents and he drove back. And it was a long journey back, so he had time to think things over and think things about what was going to be right for them both. And when he got to the other end, he handed his notice in and he started making the long journey back. Well, Saul had enrolled at the local school. His grandparents had taken him along, and he felt so much more at home. He felt so much more relaxed, and he was learning so much. And he even felt he knew what he was going to be when he left school, and that was an artist. And then, of course, he was able to spend such a great time with his grandparents. He would go out for walks with them. And on one of these occasions, his grandmother said, you know, this Arctic fox, well, on the night that your mother was born, there was an Arctic fox in the garden. And then she said, and also that was the case the night that you were born. And Saul started to think about this more. But anyway, his dad was going to be coming back the next day. So hopefully this would be a new start for him and his dad. But he was on the veranda with his grandparents, and he looked out. They both did, him and his grandmother. And there in the distance was a beautiful Arctic fox. It was as if there was somebody or something looking over them. And certainly that was a lot of what the Inuit people felt, that your ancestors looked down and over you to make sure that things are all right. And it was kind of comforting, but the northern lights were in the sky. And it was said that a fox would brush its tail in the snow and sparks would fly high and into the stars. And this would be like the older people, the people that had passed on, like his mum, looking down on them and making sure that they were okay. So the next day he would see his father, and they would start a new life together. Yeah.
Oh, lovely. Thank you very much, Diana. It's always lovely stories, always beautifully told. And I think we call them guardian angels sometimes in our culture.
Yeah.
Yes. So the ancestors watching over you is a good thing sometimes. So we go to Cirrus. So have you travelled today to Spain? Have you been in airplanes today, or did you get back yesterday?
I arrived to my island yesterday. I flew on Friday because I had to go to Athens first and then take the boat the next morning.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So your island hasn't got an airport. You just have to get there by boat.
It does have an airport, but there are planes only 3 times a week. So if you're lucky,
Yes.
you might get there.
Right. Okay. So tell us a story. Yes. You must have learned many new stories in the week from lots of different people.
I have. Indeed, my mind is full. In fact, they need to settle a bit before I'm able to go through them, I think.
Yeah.
But instead of giving you one of the new stories I heard, I think I would like to give you today one of the stories I was planning to tell at Semalfna and I didn't. So what I did learn there is how to say once upon a time in Arab language. So here it goes. Kan ya makan fiko di zaman. There was a big city. And in this city, there were layers of walls. You had one wall with their gates and then another wall after it and another wall after it. So it was like a fortress. Every morning, every evening, the gates would close, and every morning the gates would open. And the first thing they did was that the guards would go out and check if everything was in order before leaving the people in. So it was that one morning the gates opened and 2 of the guards stepped out of the gate and went to check around the perimeter. As they were walking, they saw a shadow of something in a ditch, and they could not tell exactly what it was. As they approached, they saw that it was a man in rags sleeping in the ditch. Now they thought that that must have been a beggar or something going there to irritate the people of the city, begging for money, and they had better send him away because that was their job after all. So the two of them, they went there and they pushed the man away, and they started dragging him up and pushing him around, and the man stepped backward and he looked at the guards very sternly and he said, "How dare you?" And he started wiping the dust off his cloth. He looked them in the eye, daring, and he said, "How dare you touch somebody whose name you know nothing of and whose generation you know nothing of?" Now, the man's boldness took the guards by surprise. They looked at each other, and one guard elbowed the other, and he said, "Do you think that may be the captain? I have heard that sometimes the captain of the guard goes out unrecognized in disguise so that he checks on us, see if we're doing our job properly. Do you think we might have fallen for it? Oh my, what awaits us?" So the other guard, in fear now, turns to the man and asks, "Pardon, excuse us, sir, but do you happen to be our captain?" The man looked at them and he sneered. "Higher, soldiers," he said. "Higher." Oh, now that had them worried. And one turned to the other and he said, "Higher than the guard. Oh, I have heard that sometimes it's the Grand Vizier who goes out in disguise so that people won't recognize him. Do you think we've really stepped on it this time?" So the first man turned to the man and he said, "Pardon us, forgive us, sir. If you're not the captain, would you perchance be the Grand Vizier?" "Huh," said the man. "Higher, soldiers, higher," he said. Now the man's face is turned white. If it hadn't been the Grand Vizier, could it be? They looked at each other and they started rambling, and one found the courage to say, "Pardon, sire, is it you? Are you our Sultan?" And they bent forward and their foreheads touched the ground in repentance. But he looked at them in dismay and said, "Get up, soldiers. Think. Higher, soldiers, higher." The soldiers did not get up. They kept their foreheads and their noses on the ground, and they muttered through clenched teeth, "If it's not the Sultan." And they raised their eyes and they said, "There's only one thing higher than the Sultan. Is it you, great Allah? Have we offended our God?" And the man looked at them and he said, "Higher, soldiers, higher." Now the men looked at each other and they said, "But Lord, there is nothing higher than Allah." "That's right," said the man. "There is nothing higher than the God. So you must respect anyone whose name you know nothing about, anyone whose generation you know nothing about, because even nothing has its value." Shukran, Mzef.
Oh, thank you. That's lovely. Thank you very much. Right, so for tonight, well, I hope you're going to be pleased to hear that I'm going to call it tonight. We've been going for an hour. It's a very quiet one because half the people are normally here either in Marrakesh or traveling there and back again and all the rest of it. Thank you for coming tonight. It's been really lovely. And in a fortnight's time, we'll probably have a few more people around and we'll go back to, and hopefully I couldn't make Marrakesh personally this year. And if I had been there, I would have had to come back anyway for something to happen in this end. But they have been nice enough to invite me in 2 years' time already. So hopefully I'll be able to go in 2 years' time. But apart from that, there we go. Oh, that's from Lucy. Yeah, okay. Right, that's Diana Pierce. Hang on, we're getting all sorts of messages coming.
You are invited.
Oh, that's very nice of you to say, Lucy. It really is. And I've been watching you from a distance, and you seem to have had a smashing time. And I was really pleased for everybody having a great time that you're all having. Right.
So what time do you normally finish? Just whenever everyone's done their stories?
I start at 7, and I'm happily to sit while everybody else tells a story who wants to tell. Or it's not just stories, Helen, it's poetry, monologues, jokes and things like that. I've never been here much before after 9 o'clock, apart from a couple of times when there was a lot of people here, and it's always gone on. So it's normally start at 7, finish about 8:30, 8:45 is the average. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Yeah.
See you
then.
then.
We have a storytelling club in Much Wenlock, which we do once a month if you happen to be in the area.
Okay.
I'm trying rapidly to remember a very friend of mine, storyteller who lived in Reading, who I haven't heard of for years and years, who was part of the early Society for Storytelling and everything else, but I can't remember her name. As soon as I log off, I'm going to remember.
Yeah.
Anyway, Despina, Keith, Helen, Diana, Lucy, lovely as always. Walid, thank you for sitting in and sorting us all out again. And I'll see you all in a fortnight. Okay.
Thanks.
And Lucy, bye-bye, Lucy.
Bye.
Oh, bye-bye. Who's that?
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye, bye-bye.
Big kiss.
Bye-bye, bye-bye.